When I say GTX 1080, this comes into your mind. When I say GTX 1080 Aftermarket Edition, this comes into your mind. These two cards in question are, of course, the GTX 1080 Founders Edition and the GTX 1080 Strix. Now, I've reviewed both of these cards, which you can check out in the description down below, and indeed they are very good performers, each with their own pros and cons. I guess you could say they are the most mainstream GTX 1080 cards available, but something I've grown fond of is breaking out of the mainstream to bring to light some other options available, which more often than not turn out to be the much better buy. Today I'll be covering my third and probably final GTX 1080. Say hello to the meat sack, the menace, the Palit GTX 1080 Jetstream Edition. Possibly the most striking thing about this GPU is that huge fat-ass cooler on it. Initially, when actually ordering my 980 Ti, I didn't really like the Jetstream edition, or even 3-slot coolers in general. However, I took the Jetstream plunge with my GTX 1070, and as soon as I unboxed it, I instantly knew that it would grow on me. That's right, I own the GTX 1080 Jetstream before upgrading to the 1080 version, and there are so many things I plain and simply love about this card, which is why I'm so surprised to see such little coverage of it here on YouTube, specifically English coverage. And that is exactly what I hope to achieve with this card. I'll be breaking this review up into different chapters, all of which you can find down in the description down below. But without further ado, let's get into the specs of the card. Under the hood is your typical stock GTX 1080, 2560 CUDA cores, 1708 MHz base clock, and 1847 MHz boost clocks, 8GB of GDDR5X, and all running on a 256 memory interface. But what's new about this card? Well, for starters, it has an extra 6-pin PCIe power connector, totaling one 8-pin and one 6-pin, which means more power is able to get delivered to our beastie GPU, which should, in theory, result in better overclocks. For the I/O, we have 3 DisplayPort 1.4 connections, 1 HDMI 2.0B port, and finally 1 DVI port. On the flip side, we have this rather tame, unintrusive, and rather sleek looking RGB LED logo. No RGB logo on the top of the backplate, like that of which we see on the Strix, just one on the side, which I can appreciate. It is evenly lit all along it, and any colour you select really does a great job at popping and standing out, even in a tinted case on my Phanteks Enthoo Evolve. This will be great for those who admire the aesthetics of a card, especially one as beefy as this, and oh boy, is she thick. This card populates 2 of your PCI brackets on your case, but that cooler is so big it'll end up hogging 3 in reality. The card doesn't just have the girth though, it's also very schlong. Okay, enough the dick puns. The card is 285mm or 11.2 inches in length. Its sheer size gives heat produced by the GPU, a lot of room to dissipate in your case. If you have good positive airflow, then this card will surely take advantage of that. Aesthetics of the card are nice, but the LED really doesn't have any functions other than static colours. You can choose whichever colour you want. It is RGB, but if you're looking for a card with a lot of effects, this one isn't for you. Personally, I really don't give a shit, as I'm the kind of guy who uses RGB products just to choose a static colour that matches my setup or my PC. I don't care much for gimmicks, and it seems neither does Palit, so if you're really not into this RGB fad everyone's going through right now, Palit can relate. As I said, its basic function is very good. The LED is very vibrant and uniform and does look great with no dead zones. Much better than any Strix or any other card on the market that I've seen so far. The white is also pretty white, not brown or blue or red tinted like I've seen on other cards in the past. You choose the colour of the LED through a shitty software that I really wouldn't recommend using other than to quickly change your card's LED logo, as its other functions aren't very intuitive for stuff like overclocking. The UI looks quite frankly disgusting, although it does let you have the chosen LED colour right from startup, which isn't always a feature with a lot of cards. Some cards, you have to change it every time you go into your desktop, so I can appreciate the fact that Palit have made it so it does it automatically. Well, that's the specs out out the way, before we get into the performance, let's explore overclocking. So, stock settings, this card boosted to a lovely 1880 MHz thanks to GPU Boost 3.0. The temperature, after about an hour of playing, rose to 72 degrees C, which I thought was a little odd. My 1070 Jetstream would get to 63 degrees max, and even taking into account that the 1080 is a faster card, it felt like it was a bit hotter than it should have been. But, nevertheless, it's still a fantastic temperature. I then looked at the fan speed and saw it was only at 15%. That might explain it. So I played around with the fan curve. I set it so the fans didn't ramp up until 50 degrees C. After that they would gradually climb to 70% at 60 degrees C, then to 80% at 75 degrees C, then 90% at 85 degrees C, and finally 100% at 90 degrees C. To my surprise, this made the card boost to 1900 MHz without an overclock, and even after an hour of playing Battlefield 1 maxed out, it hovered around 58 to 59 degrees Celsius. Bearing in mind my room can get exceptionally hot, that is more like it. If you're curious about fan noise, you can't hear the fans at 70%, with the side panel on and headphones off. You can hear it at 100%, but anything under, I'd say, 80% is pretty inaudible. I decided to see how far I could push the GPU, using Unigine Heaven as my stress test, and oh boy am I feeling good about these results. The first thing I increased was the core clock. I tried out plus 200 MHz and that was stable, then plus 300 MHz and that initially gave stable results, but there was some slight artifacting in the Heaven benchmark, so I dropped it down to 250 and that seemed to clear it all up. Although, despite its stability, I dropped it down a smidge more to 2035 MHz to ensure it would remain completely stable across all resolutions on all games, as in the past I have had overclocks show instability in certain games, despite others being well in the clear. This put the card at 2140 MHz, which is a bit of a dead zone for GTX 1080 GPUs. There aren't many cards at all that can reach it, or reach past it. Technically you can get this card to 2200 MHz, just about, if you don't mind artifacting and a chance at crashes. But if you're wondering if this GPU surpasses 2.1 GHz, it does, and it doesn't end there. Not expecting much, I also experimented with the GPU memory clock. I tried out 100 MHz thinking I'd be lucky if I got that out of the card, and I was. Luckier still, in fact. I kept pushing until I reached plus 500 MHz on the memory. This put the card's memory clock speed to an effective 11 GHz. That's well over 2.1 GHz on the core and 11 GHz on the memory. It's safe to say this card can overclock. Before we move on, I'd like to inform you guys on something I like to call the Tryte benefit system. This is a chance for you guys to win a free game of your choice. How it works is simple. You subscribe and like the video, then comment down below the indicating word in a funny or peculiar sentence. And once I see you are subscribed, I'll enter you into the giveaway. You can gain more entries by sticking with the channel, sharing the video and commenting the indicating word on each new upload. If you wish, you can always become a patron and support my channel. With each increasing tier, better rewards are unlocked, such as GPU or peripheral giveaways, and more giveaway entries so you can have a greater chance of winning. With all that out of the way, today's indicating word is bucolic. Put that word in a funny sentence down below, don't forget to like and subscribe, and you'll be in the giveaway. My favourite will gain an additional entry. Good luck to the winner, and let's continue with the video. We've done overclocking, let's get into some benchmarks. These tests were run at the aforementioned overclock settings, and other specs are an i7-5820K at 4.5 GHz, 16GB of 2666 MHz DDR4 RAM, all on an Asus Sabertooth X99 motherboard. Let's jump into it. First up is Battlefield 1 multiplayer. First, we'll start at 1080p fully maxed out. On the left is 1920x1080 and on the right is 2560x1080. Basically, on the left we have the conventional 16:9 monitors and on the right we have the unconventional 21:9 monitors. At 1920x1080 completely maxed out, we saw some fantastic performance, floating roughly in the 140 to 150 FPS margins. There is a similar story at 2560x1080, where the FPS is only slightly lower, reining in at 120 to 140 FPS on average. At our two 1440p resolutions, things remained extremely smooth. At 2560x1440, again fully maxed out, the card pulled about 110 to 120 FPS, often scratching at that 130 FPS mark from time to time. At 3440x1440, on the other hand, we were achieving 80 to 100 FPS, 90 FPS being the average middle ground. That's quite a big step down in performance, but if you think about it, there's a lot more pixels to drive there, nearly as many as 4K. If you're wondering where 4K benchmarks were, by the way, I'll have a dedicated video for that out soon. Next up is The Witcher 3, same as before. At 1920x1080, fully maxed out besides hairworks, the Jetstream averaged out at 120 FPS. Very nice indeed. I must say, playing this game at 120 FPS is quite possibly the best way to experience it. With the same settings applied, we saw 2560 by 1080 C numbers averaging out at 100 FPS, with dips into the mid-90s. 1440p's offered quality boost is definitely justifiable too. Frame rate soared at 80 to 90 FPS. In the wide ass department of 21:9, performance was as followed. For 3440 by 1440, we got the card to average about 65 to 70 FPS. It seemed to run at this FPS no matter where I was. Novigrad, which is usually a hog for performance, saw the same frame rates. Dips to the mid-60s, maxed out about mid-70s. This card absolutely tears this game up. However, not everyone likes to run completely maxed out. I don't like a lot of the post-processing options, it makes the game look a bit soft and weird. My 3440 by 1440 custom settings saw the game run at about 90 FPS on average, with dips into the 80s in busy marketplaces, such as the one seen here. Elsewhere, just running around, the gameplay is around about 90, as I said, sometimes getting up to 100 depending on the scene. So there we go, this card can definitely pull its weight with the latest games. I tried to add some variation with the game selection this time. I've tested a lot of other games, so if you want to see how they perform on the GTX 1080, I'll leave my other 2 reviews of the Strix and the Founders Edition card in the description down below. The For Honor beta just ended, with the final game just being released, and if you wanted to know what this card got at 3440 by 1440, it was about 80 to 90 FPS for almost all maps, except every now and then where I just run the map at 65 FPS for no reason. Then the next time I play the map, it's fine. Strange bug going on there, but it was a beta build, so I'll forgive it. As for the temperatures there, this card did get to a max of 63 degrees Celsius, which meant the 2140 MHz overclock dropped down about 10 MHz there. This is because the ambient temperature, the temperature inside my room, was exceptionally warm. It gets like this around the early morning hours because their central heating kicks in to warm up the house. It's like summer conditions in here, and it's still only going to 63 degrees Celsius, that's just crazy. So, is there anything I don't particularly like about this card? Not really. My only gripes with the card would be the software, but I really don't give 2 cockswallops about that, so honestly I have no negatives that come to mind. But how does it fare against, say, one of the bigger boys in the ring? How does it stack up to the Asus Strix 1080? It beats it out in almost every single area that is important to the average person. Price-wise, I got this GPU for £550 brand new with a free game code with either Ghost Recon Wildlands or For Honor. I picked the latter, by the way. I've even seen this card on sites like Gumtree, Hardware Swap and various Facebook sites for less than £500, going as low as £450, which is mind-bogglingly good value for a GTX 1080. The Strix, on the other hand, goes for £620. Cheapest I've ever seen the Strix is £535 on Hardware Swap UK. Overclocking wise, the Jetstream card really can easily pull over 2100 MHz on the core and 500 MHz on the memory. The Strix, however, managed 2000 MHz with a memory boost of about 200 MHz. Temperature wise, the Jetstream can run 10 to 15 degrees lower than the Strix, and the LEDs on the card are the most vibrant and uniform across any I've ever seen. On the Strix, they're quite washed out. This all seems well and good, but where does the Strix beat the Jetstream? Well, for that extra £70 you get a dual slot cooler instead of that beefy 3 slot. The 3 slot cooler on the Jetstream card means you have to have a full tower case to SLI them. And you also have to have a PCIe X16 slot at the very bottom of your motherboard. Mine has this, but I lack a full tower case. The Strix, on the other hand, can easily be run in SLI in a normal ATX case, due to their slimmer design. If you're going for SLI, get the Strix. If you're fine with a single GPU, get the Jetstream, for those have much cooler temps and much better overclocks. The other area where we see the Strix beat out the Jetstream is with its software. The Strix has a far more fleshed out software, with better overclocking utilities and a much more in-depth lighting effects system. So, is this the best GTX 1080 out there? I think it just might be. But anyway guys, thanks so much for watching this video. If you liked it, then do show your appreciation by tapping that like button. Don't forget the Tryte benefit system. I love your face, and I will see you guys in the next one. Ta-ra.